Good morning, sir. How are you?
Man, I'm great. It's Friday. We had a sick beat to lead us in here. I'm just happy, man. Just happy to be here.
I agree with you, man. It is a finish strong Friday. I did something fun that we do coach this morning. I don't always get the opportunity, and yet this morning I capitalized on it. I started my morning off with 5 gratitude voice memos or phone calls. And my man, I went because we were a little this morning with just the seasonal stuff. I was like, I gotta get my head right. I gotta get my energy up, right? And those 5 calls just brought me, before I even got a response, by the way, it brought all my energy up. So this is a nice reminder for everybody out there. Gratitude is the highest form of energy. Coach Kyle, how you doing today, buddy? What we got on the docket for today? I think today's going to be a good one.
Well, I think we need to lay out some foundations for what's about to transpire here, ladies and gentlemen. So I asked Marcus, in the effort of transparency, as we are here, guys, we're not, if you've been with us for any amount of time, we're not about looking good and being right. We're about being raw, being real, being relatable, and showing you that we are just human beings on this journey, better or worse. Our goal is just to make it through and do as good of a job as we can. And to do that, we've got to show not just the pretty side of the apple. We got to show the bruises. We got to show the scars. And so I asked Marcus if we could be super transparent today. And he said, "Oh, let's do it. Let's do it." And so, I want to start this. Me and Marcus obviously have a great relationship, and we're pretty hyper self-aware. And if we're not self-aware enough, the other one has permission in a safe space, right? Because we built that respect. That's a big one, guys. Don't just start judging people. We built that respect to be able to have those conversations, those candid conversations, because we know they come from care. And one of the things I told Marcus this week in his new role, not a bad thing, I said, "Hey, man, I can tell that you were like hyped up for this new role. It feels to me like you have raised your bar again with how you're showing up and the questions you're asking and the content of the messages you're delivering, not just here, but inside of our organization with Constellation, how he's showing up on coaching calls, team meetings, and things like that." And it was interesting because he was like, "Yeah, man, I guess you're right." And when we were talking about that, we started really riffing on the idea of the environment that you're in. And so, Marcus, I think we start there today, bro.
Well, I didn't really. You gave the words to how I was feeling and how the goal was to show up, and yet you never know until you know. And then when your business partner and confidant gives you some validation as far as seeing some improvements or changes or whatever you want to, it was great, man. So first and foremost, thank you. And second, guys, the value of having a relationship like we've got, where you can be open about growth and about some shortcomings that may be happening. Remember, we look at failure as something very simple. Failure is a strategy to success. So that's where that mindset first comes from. So when Kyle gives me a little shake up, I'm like, okay, yeah, he's right. And even if it hurts, I need to take this and move forward because I can trust him. Yeah. So I would inspire anybody out there to start to create that relationship with someone. And yet you have to be that person for the other. Right. You have to be that type of individual. So look for it. And yet I changed my mindset because if we go back to old school bold and we go to the one that says all work fills the time allotted. Right. And I got such a cool opportunity up here. I feel super blessed. And I remember the first time I was at TL, buddy, have you ever been guilty of having a meeting and that meeting going anywhere between 15 minutes and an hour? And you leave that meeting going, what are we doing next? Like, what did we just meet to meet? Right. Yeah. Like, hey, let's plan to make a plan.
I call it the could have been an email meeting.
Right. And so I've changed that mindset up with our team, with obviously my role here and a few other arenas. And I said, I refuse to have a meeting without both people being very clear on the next 7 days or the next step for our meeting, in a little while or whatever it is. What do we leave here with as far as tactics?
Yeah.
And changing that mindset to say, I refuse to meet to meet. I only want to meet for production. That makes you show up differently, and ask better questions, because in your head you have 15 minutes to accomplish a certain goal. So that takes out, me, you, and Dustin were on here last week, and I said this is not the year for chit chat, and we're going to get
Mhm.
into that in a moment. But having that mindset shift has really made our meetings more efficient. And here's the fun part: we're growing a lot faster now than
Mhm.
if we were just gabbing it up and camaraderie without tactics. So thank you. And that's kind of where that comes from.
Yeah, man. And it's like, uh, to me, I think high performers and people who desire to be high performers, one of the things that, at least, and Marcus, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, one of the things that I see is you jumped into a new role, but you also jumped into a bigger challenge
Oh yeah.
than you have been.
Yeah.
And to do that, you force or enforcing yourself to raise your own bar and show up differently. And guys, the things that got us here are not going to get us there. And so I have to applaud you, because none of us, like, guys, I wasn't like, hey, Marcus, raise the bar, bro. Like, he just starts showing up that way himself. He had that internal fortitude, that internal choice to, hey, man, I'm doing well. I could be doing this better, but he had to seek that out. And
Mhm.
so I think, to tie a bow and land that plane, are we setting internal growth challenges, not just, hey, I sold 20 homes last year, let me sell 50. I mean, like, hey, I was this type of agent. I desire to be this type of agent. How does that agent show up? And then start acting that way.
Are you doing the best you can or the best that can be done? And when you ask who the best is and what the best looks like, you start to change your how you show up in total. It's one of those things. We can simplify that in any arena of life, whatever hat that you wear. We always are gym bros at the end of the day. So are you going in with an actual tactic for where you want your physique or where you want your health, or are you just showing up and saying, what's this machine do? Cool, I'll do this for 5 times and move on, right? So it's been a lot of fun, but the biggest thing is surrounding myself with people like you and like my ownership group up here who are willing to push me and find my true potential, because that's all we're really chasing at the end of the day. So that kind of leads us over to me and Kyle. Kyle woke up and chose violence yesterday, and he sent out something to our team in regards to a chat GPT prompt. And I am not a rookie to chat GPT, but this one went down a rabbit hole of self-discovery that we're going to share a little bit with you, and we're going to put the prompts below if you are brave enough to take this challenge on. Kyle, one, why'd you do this to me? Two, what'd you take away?
Well, so guys, what Marcus did was blame me for the violence that ensued. The truth of the matter is he's to blame. You see, when we talk about raising our own internal standard, one of the beautiful things about that is the people around you start to feel that positive momentum and usually do the same. It's one of the ways that you know that you're in the right boat. And so Marcus is doing this. I'm like, man, cool. So I'm like being more self aware this week. Like, great. Let me see some of my blind spots. How can I get better at different things? What are some things I'm doing mediocre? I could be doing great. And I stumbled across this massive self awareness, I guess you could say, chat GPT prompt. And I was like, well, let's see what it says. Let's
Hmm.
see what it says about Kyle. And it was so, I wasn't ready for the response. Now, the cool thing about it was, Marcus, is some of the things that it said, I'm already aware of and have been working on and continue to work on. And so it's part of the journey. And some of the other things was some things that I kind of knew was there, but I was like an ostrich with my head in the sand and didn't
Yeah.
really want to look at it.
No, that's perfectly said.
And I figured in the effort of transparency to show you guys that me and Marcus are just a work in progress, we would share with you some of those results. And also at the end, I'll give you the prompts, the massive prompt in the chat GPT. So here you go, guys. Here it started with this, the rawest layer for me in its assumption, its dissection of who I am.
Yeah.
It said, if the mission disappeared, would you still feel worthy, or would you feel like you lost the very thing that makes you matter? Ouch.
How you feel? What do you take from that? Like,
Well,
how do you internalize that when reading it about yourself and
Mhm.
knowing what's going on in here? And I think ChatGPT actually told me what was going on here a little bit deeper. But when you read that about yourself, what's your takeaway, man?
It's the journey I've been on for probably 7 years now, man, and it's one I love to talk about. It's the increasing of your own self-image and your own self-worth, and to
Mhm.
see ChatGPT call it out and say, "Hey, man, you may be further along the road, but you ain't there yet," was very interesting to me, right? And so it's like, okay, cool. Let's just continue to work on that. Ouch. And let's continue to go through that. So for me, it's like, hey, man, the job's not done. Like, don't rest on your laurels. Like, we still have ways to go. Um, but at the end of it, and the base layer is, are you really practicing your own worthiness to yourself, to no one else?
Correct. Correct. How are you actually, taking that in? What value do you see instead of, is it just the goal? Is it just the accomplishment that validates me, or am I worthy prior to
Mhm.
that? And then leading all the way up to it. All right. Sharing is caring. So I'll take a hit now. I'll take a
We
hit.
listen and we don't judge.
All right. So it's funny, man, because you and me, our first ever podcast, long form, you gave me the pearly gates analogy. And it's funny that this comes up because it broke down identifying a hidden narrative. And there's an unspoken fear that I've got because beneath all the surface layer stuff, high driven, it says strategic, ambitious, all the things, whatever. It said that there's an unspoken fear below, and it says the fear of wasted potential. And I
Mm.
was like, no, that's Kyle's. Don't talk about me like that. Right. And it kept going. And it's funny because then it says this surfaces in multiple ways, yet the origin of this fear, you were once underestimated or misunderstood. You experienced moments where you realized you had operated below your capability and swore to never do it again. And then you have high standards for yourself, often rooted in early realization that they could outperform most if they applied themselves fully. So you got to think in my life. So this is a little bit of, I don't know how they know or how it knows. When I was in college, I dropped out for a semester and I worked at Abercrombie and Fitch.
Hot.
No judgment whatsoever. All right, and yet I was making $8-9 an hour. Right, hurt my back, couldn't even work that job. I'm laid up in bed, and I say hurt my back like stress fracture. Okay, with like sincere. Laid up in bed, I started to have to sell my stuff because I refused to ask for money from my mom. Like I refused. And
Mhm.
then I have in my office a shadow box that has $1.09 in it. And that
Mhm.
was all I could afford for lunch anytime I worked, but I refused to tell anybody. And that tapped into, I fell below my standard, and I've already got a taste of how much I could achieve if I jumped all the way in. And man, that gap is just it kills me. So having it say that, and it boils down to, it's not the fear just of what you can accomplish, it's the fear about avoiding the regret of not having done more. Um, so it went a little deeper, and the follow up to this is much more prevalent. And yet, when I heard all that, man, I was like, okay, so how can I reframe this, and how can I enjoy the moments more as opposed to always chasing and always thinking, how could have today been more fluid? How could it today have been more efficient? How about I just say, hey, what'd you really appreciate today? Like, what was awesome about today? I ask my coaching clients every time, I was like, give me a score of 1 to 10, how your last week was. And they'll say 8, 7, whatever it is. And a lot of people go immediately, well, what would make it a 10? I pause and I say, awesome. What earned that 8? Like, what earned it? Like, what are you proud of? And I'm sitting there reading this and I'm like, I need to do that for myself, apparently, a little bit more often.
It's dangerous, Marcus.
It is, man. It is. Now
So,
it goes a little deeper because there's one prompt that gives you that surface level, and there's a second prompt that kind of
mhm.
tells you a little bit more about your psychology. What's your second prompt, man? What was the thing that you took away from that part?
Yeah, man. So, like, one of them, the first uncovering of the onion said, "You built a lot," and this is hurtful, ladies and gentlemen. Let me share
Mm-hmm.
my hurt with you. You've built a life of discipline, productivity, and growth. You thrive on impact, helping others, building teams, leaving a legacy. Yeah, pretty good. That's about right.
Mm-hmm.
Yet, if you stop, even for a moment, there's an unspoken anxiety. Was it all just motion? Does any of it truly anchor me to meaning beyond effort itself? At its core, you might fear that your drive is not proof of your success, but evidence that you haven't yet reached a place where you can rest without guilt.
Mm.
I read that to my wife and she just stared at me.
How do you take that information and then reframe your moments of happiness, your moments of contentment with your life? Like, you take that information, how do you then apply? Like,
So
what's your tactic?
that's the cool thing about this prompt, man, is it didn't just tear you down, it gave you ways with the second prompt. And it said this, man, shift from momentum for momentum's sake to surgical progress. And it said, not all forward motion is productive. Some of it is just an escape mechanism. Shots fired. Example, only pursue new ventures when they align with a deep internal why, not just because they keep you moving. And so I
Ooh.
thought that was super cool. And guys, by the way, with the second prompt, it walks you through an 80-20 principle, the Pareto
Mm.
principle on what to focus on and stuff. And so I will be taking some of this and applying it because information not reflected upon or acted on is essentially useless. And it's very open, guys. I strongly recommend that you take this journey and be um, open to the responses that you get.
I think you've got to have an open mind if you run this play, right? You've got to welcome whatever information that it sends your way. And hey, there's nothing better than being self aware, because that's how we get to self mastery. We have said that every week of this show. So, man, I love that, and I do love that it gives you tactics. I had a realization on this, man. It goes through how I approach, like we just talked, meetings and everything of that nature. Apparently, your boy is getting a little cold hearted. All right. It said that while all that is going to be really great for business and purpose and the whole thing, it said I may be falling short and looking at relationships or
Mm.
conversations as, okay, what is the optimal, most efficient use of our time? And instead of doing that, why don't we just enjoy having a deeper connection? Right. So instead of looking at what's the next step, what am I getting out of this conversation? Is this the best use of my current time?
Mm-hmm.
Full disclosure, that is me being guilty 100%. And
Yeah, it's
it's
what we
not,
just talked about at the beginning of the show.
yeah, it's well, and here's the thing: the heart is somewhere, and yet the head is overdoing the heart. Because when I'm in front of
Mhm.
somebody, I am thinking, we get 30 minutes. Let's make this the best 30, right? Or an hour. And yet that's going to come off from time to time, like all I care about is the business side or a next task or this, that, and the other. And we all know this. It's not what you do or say, it's how you make somebody feel. And so slowing down and really deepening the connection versus being so enthralled with just the next step, that's apparently a big opportunity for me to grow.
Well,
So
it's
you
it's
have
one
a
of the things, Marcus, that you need to take your own advice on, guys. And I'm about to use one of Marcus's favorite examples for him because, hey, take my advice. I'm not using it anyway. Marcus,
yeah, man.
am I balancing this paper on my hand? Am
Yeah.
I balancing it, buddy? That prompt to you is just a reminder, hey, Don't go to one end of the spectrum. Don't go to the other end. You just got to constantly be aware that you should be balancing or counterbalance, as we like to say from the one thing, ladies and gentlemen. Touche, buddy. Touche.
That was well played. You didn't tell me you were going to do that, and here we are. No, man, it was really eye opening, and that's just scratching the surface of some of the information that it gave us. So, guys, if you want to tap into that resource and see what it says to you, we would love if you're brave enough to put like the one-liner that you get from it in the comments. Shoot us a text, a message, whatever, and let's all be miserable for a minute together.
Do you want to play a game? Yeah.
Right. No, man, it was great.
Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing that with us.
Yeah, man, guys, that's kind of what we had for you today, man. Just a little bit about self-awareness, a little bit about, hey, we should constantly be seeking the best in ourselves, and that's surrounding ourselves with the right people, being open, like Marcus and I were, to feedback and saying, where is my actual DNA on this? And not just, okay, this is me. It's what can I do about it now?
Yeah.
And accept that challenge and reach for the best that you can be, man. That's all this is.
I love that the prompt does the 80-20 principle, because that is, for my mindset, that's dialed in really well. So, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, this has been your Finish Strong Friday. We trust that if you're a little bit behind on calls or meetings or whatever that thing may be, finish strong today. Make sure that this week is a W for you in the category of the games. We love you. We'll see you Monday. Have a great weekend.